All right, I started recording. Let's come back to our introduction. My name is, welcome again. My name is İlker Özkaya. It has been over 17 years of experience in IT. Most part of it as a developer. I worked as a tester, analyst, R&D engineer, account manager, project manager, scrum master, agile coach, trainer. I'm one of the co-founders of Agile Society Turkey. I thank you all for participating in our webinar. Today, we have guests in attendance from all around the world. And I would like to thank Jean for accepting our invitation. I personally, or should I say virtually, Jean, know Jean for a couple of months. We were both panelists at Agile Advisory Africa Summit, series number 2 in August 2020, I guess, as far as I remember. He's going to introduce himself for the ones who doesn't know him before. We as Agile Society Turkey, a non-profit community organization, are organizing seminars, webinars, trainings, events, participating or supporting summits, trying to contribute to the Agile community, both in Turkey and all around the world. You may follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Eventbrite, YouTube, and also on Medium in a short while. Or you can connect directly with me, İlker Özkaya, or Agile Society Turkey on LinkedIn for anything like cooperation opportunities or events, webinars, anything. We will be recording the webinar for sharing on our YouTube channel. I hope everyone is okay with that. I would like to leave the floor to Jean, but before, Mete, do you have anything to say?
No, thank you. I would like to thank again Jean for being here with us tonight. And please, you can start with your presentation. Thank you.
Arkadaşlar çok kısa birkaç kelime de Türkçe söyleyeyim. Hoş geldiniz tekrar. Katılımınız için çok teşekkürler. İngilizce şey yapmış oldum, konuşmuş ve özetlemiş oldum girişi. Kusura bakmayın lütfen. Hani çünkü farklı bölgelerden katılımcılar kayıt yaptırdığı olarak gözüküyordu. O yüzden İngilizce konuşma gereği ihtiyacı hissettik. Çok fazla uzatmayacağım. Sahneyi Jean'e terk ediyorum. Now I'm going to make you host, Jean, and I'll leave the floor to you, okay?
Great, excellent. Thank you. And by the way, I just want to make sure my recording, still don't have the recording capability, but maybe you can give it to me. Meanwhile, I'll just quickly introduce myself. Oh, now I think I can.
Yeah.
Hold on one second. Stop. I think I'm recording, so excellent. Well, thank you folks again for having me here. I want to make sure at least I pronounce your names right. Miti and İlker, right? Is it Miti or Mitu?
Mete.
Mete. I want to make sure. I'm usually good with names, so
yeah.
If I miss it, just correct me. I don't really do a good job introducing myself. Usually I just don't know how to do well the 30-second elevator drop pitch who I am. I would like to say is, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. I'm someone who has been around, I guess, in this industry long enough to have some scars to show it, to prove it. I guess organizational design, consultancy, coaching, and mentoring and training has been my focus for way more than a decade. I've worked different industries, financial technology, investment banking, insurance companies, product companies, pharmaceuticals. So it's pretty wide array of experience. And I've seen plenty of things that have become my personal body of knowledge. And I use it as much as I can during my coaching and training and mentoring moments with individuals, teams, and organizations. So without any further ado, I do want to say something else. I pinged to the chat room for everyone if you would like. The slide deck that I'm going to be using, this one, the one that I'm showing, is already uploaded on the page that is right here. You can probably see it in the chat. The first one that says Masquerades and Omissions. So you can follow the deck if you would like, or I'd rather you be engaged with me and then pick the deck. the recording I'm going to also upload there. And there's some other references as well on stuff that I do. And oh, by the way, there was a Slack channel for free. You can join my Slack channel if you have any questions after the event. You can always ping me freely, and I'm usually very responsive. Okay. And I'll keep my tone just slightly down because it's the third long session today for me. So my voice is kind of beat up. So I apologize. So I'm going to start off with the this is what I have kind of synthesized for myself. This is what my personal perception of the industry at the moment. These are the three key words that have been abused industry-wide over the last couple of years, right? At least a couple of years, longer than that. And Mike, kind of ask, if you don't mind, just mute yourself. And if you really have a question, unmute. Always great to have you on video. If you want to activate your camera, it would be great for me to see you. But in any case, let me go back to what I was about to say here. So back in 2001, when the 17 gentlemen got together in the Snowboard, Utah, to discuss and define what we know today as an Agile manifesto, the word Agile wasn't the first one on the list. The word adaptive was, which is a much more common word. It's easier to understand. Because you ask what is adaptive? Well, it means you can easily adapt to something. The gentleman by name Jim Highsmith was, I believe, was the person who introduced it. And then there was a discussion. It wasn't the best word because Jim had a book at that time written with the name adaptive in it. So there was another gentleman, the belated Mike Beadle, God rest his soul. He actually proposed the word agile, which wasn't really a very common. It's not a common term. If you ask someone in the street, what is agile? Unless someone comes like from team sports or individual sports or maybe military background, they don't understand what agile is. So why am I saying this? Because if you hear or see someone using the word agile and you're questioning whether they really understand what it means, ask them to substitute with the word adaptive. If the meaning didn't change, it means they got it right. The meaning is completely off, then most likely they're misusing the word. There are other words you can use to check it, like light-footed, nimble, acrobatic, responsive. If any of those words are in line with what someone meant as an agile, then we are good. Otherwise, there's a reason to challenge what this person meant. In order to scale goodness, we don't necessarily need to, so let me rephrase that. In order to scale goodness, we may need to descale what's prevented us, what prevents us from scaling goodness. So when we hear scaling, oftentimes we need to also challenge it. What exactly are we scaling? Do you have already goodness in place that you want to increase, you have more of it or increase the volume of it? Because we oftentimes see organizations and individuals misusing the term, and they think just because you have more of something, you're scaling. In reality, what you're doing, you're just re-amplifying organizational dysfunction as we know it today. So the word scaling is a bit of a tricky term these days. And of course, the word enterprise. We don't need to have a 50,000 man company or a 100,000 man company to call it an enterprise. You may easily have a company of maybe 60, 70, 100, 150 people. And that is an enterprise only if, of course, if you got things like HR, finance, legal, vendor management involved. Someone who works for a large IT department of 300 or 400 people does not necessarily work for an enterprise. They work for a large department. Of course, if you add these three words together, you may end up with a lot of, with a lot of terminology abuse, such as enterprise agile scaling. What a loaded term, right? So if you decouple it, you're gonna find three words that could be probably misused within that within that single phrase. Moving on to this next slide. This is just good old Scrum. I mean, I'm sure you've been around Scrum, and everyone understands that in order to be able to deliver by using Scrum framework, by the way, it's not a methodology, it's not an operating model. Scrum is a light framework. You need to have a single backlog, one product owner. You need to work in a customer-centric way. stable, long-lived team, cross-functional, cross-component team. That's how you can deliver something potentially shippable in the end. Now, if you have multiple teams like these, and they all work on independent products, like really independent products, small products, yeah, then maybe you want to keep it that way. Each team has their own product owner, each team has their own product backlog because they truly have independent products. However, we oftentimes see this becoming copy-paste game when you have a bunch of teams just copy-pasting each other's structure, and someone claims this becoming a scaling model. Although these teams have very little to do with one another in terms of priorities, in terms of focus, in terms of body of work. They clearly work on different things. And why do we usually see this problem? Well, we oftentimes see this problem when there is an organizational pressure. We need to scale, we need to scale, we need to scale. And it just comes down from the top of the house, and individuals start playing the scaling game. So they kind of staple together teams and efforts and work that has very little relevance to one another. So this is really not a scaling. This is almost like a copy-paste approach. This is copy-pasting, not really scaling. Here's another example of how things could get out of hands. The option number one here is probably very clear to everyone. You got analysis sprint, design sprint, a bunch of development sprints and testing. Only then you deliver something that's potentially shippable. Everyone says, oh, no, this is mini waterfall. But it's not obvious with option number two, because you may see here actually multiple teams sprinting, quote unquote, concurrently in the same direction on the same cadence, but what deliver at the tail end is just a component, not a feature. So now it becomes a question, what do you do with these independent components? Well, you need to integrate them together. So this is really not Scrum, and this is really not scaling. This is just a bunch of component teams working on the same schedule. And now it becomes a question, can we call it really scaling, right? Because you kind of scale the effort of one team by 5. No, these are 5 independent component teams working independently. And of course, with this, you have a lot of integration and bug fixing to do at the end, with only potentially shippable product increment potentially becoming available later on. Of course, there's a better way to do it, right? And with this come these classic problems. Product definition is typically weak. We oftentimes see this when teams are trying to do Scrum for the sake of doing Scrum. When you have territorial code ownership around individual components. When you have this top-down command and control coming from the top of the house. Too many single specialty experts and very few T-shaped workers. And really, in the end, it's very little, if any, support from HR. So it's almost like a system game without much involvement from the organizational level, from the system, from the HR level, which is so much needed. I'm not sure if you guys like electric cars, and there's a S model out there, right? I call it a merciless plagiarism of the S model. But of course, S doesn't stand for the model of a car. It stands for something else. So if you take an existing organizational structure that is vertical and flip it on its side 90 degrees, and now you call it a chapter, that's most likely, I mean, at best, I'm going to call it a mistake, but at worst, I'm going to call it a masquerade, because you're preserving all of the original structural elements, such as reporting lines, management relationships, individual performance, etc. Here's another example of a masquerade. When you take some very loosely coupled group of individuals and you simply just relabel them into a squad because it sounds fancy and it sounds very sexy, right? You now call it a squad. And of course, you take these bunch of squads and you shove it into a tribe because it's just another great term to use. And what used to be a portfolio of some sort of or a program, you just relabel it into a tribe and you make a portfolio manager into a tribe lead. So of course, what I'm hinting to is the so-called Spotify model And although it was a great, I mean, I stress it, it was a great experiment that was ran by a small music company at one point. It has become just got out of hand. So many companies, with help of large consultancies, oftentimes they introduce this as the de facto. They just really unpack it out of the box and try to install in their own organizations, while the original proposers and people that have experimented with this actually go on the record and say, please don't copy from us. We were a 50, 60 man company when we did it, and only 13, 14 page experiments that we have captured. You turn it into a model. That's not what we meant. That's not what it was meant for. So here's an example of scaling have gone bad, with lots of relabeling around it. This is just a pass-through slide. With this, we have quite a bit of certification system gaming, right? We got, I'm kind of building you up to it, right? So you have an industry infestation with certification, right? We have so many people that are in pursuit of scaling certifications. So here's a birth certificate, right? But imagine this, everyone who was born at one point, along with the birth certificate, was given a scaling certificate. And that's, maybe you want to mute yourself. And that's what that's oftentimes what we see, right? We see lots of system gaming by providing individuals with certifications that, just create an illusion of expertise. And I am, frankly, referring to this unfortunate situation that we see in the market here, right? When we have a bunch of agile teams, maybe some of them actually working in a customer-centric way. And there is a customer, of course, and you probably want to have a very short conduit between agile teams and a customer, very close proximity. But because you got so many managers and metrics and architects and various structures around and many layers of everything, your customer centricity is being jeopardized. You no longer have direct communication with a real customer and agile teams. And of course, questions that come out of this are, where's customer centricity? I mean, why do you have such long feedback loops? I mean, this is a pretty long feedback loop, right? Would you not agree with this? This is a much shorter feedback loop. How really adaptive can you be when you have, when you have a customer that changes their request? How long would it take, in fact, to turn it into a code, to turn it into a shippable product? And what really has changed since the moment you initially started doing this? So those are the questions we often get. And of course, this is just a small version of it. With every version, you're going to get a new certificate. And that's not only ineffective, it's very costly to people and to organizations. This is just a mighty diagram that you made. This, of course, this is a cartoon. Please take it as it's something that should make you think hard. Avoid this. It's the Spotify model that has gotten out of hands. I don't expect you to read this, every element of this slide. It's just going to be too complex. The more complexity you have in your framework, the more complexity you're going to have in the system, and vice versa. In fact, if your framework explicitly says we're not challenging your organizational design, then most likely it means that your existing organizational complexity will not be challenged either. I had a few months ago, I had a pleasure to of having Dave Snowden, who was out of the UK, who spoke at my meetup. I also have a large scale Scrum meetup. And he actually spoke about the safe choice, why companies choose safe. And of course, the 2 slides above, there was an example of, there was a cartoon that was illustrating safe. He explains why large consultancies use safe to sell to clients. And his reasoning was that it's a great industrial model. Because when you engage with safe adoption, you dig in for at least a couple of years. And of course, large consultancies are not in business of having quick transactional, engagements in and out. They want to stay there for good. So it's an amazing way to dig in deeper and to stay there. You can actually follow this link. It's also on my website. On my website, you can pull it up there. Here's another example of potentially flawed attempt to scale. When you got, so it may look great when you have this optic device called kaleidoscope, right? Maybe you remember from your childhood, you twist a pipe and you got these bright, nice, colorful crystals. So it almost looks like very symmetrical. They would call it fractal design. Here's an example of it. You got multiple teams. Each team has their own scrum master and someone who's called TOO. You may think, well, what's a TOO? Well, it's a wrong term to use in Scrum. There's no such thing as a TOO. It stands for Team Output Owner. It's one of those situations where you have someone who is not empowered to set priorities, who is not empowered to do what's expected of a product owner, yet who is being put in a position to pretend they're fulfilling the role. There are some great videos of it. So of course, with that, there's a lot of coordination, excessive coordination. There's a lot of private backlogs. Each team has their own backlog with dedicated team output order, and each scrum, each scrum master, and every team estimates in a silo. When you have private backlogs, of course, it leads to local optimization. Of course, it leads to confusion. And if you ask any product owner, can they prioritize multiple backlogs, one against another? The answer would be, of course not. They can't, because they're all important, right? So this team output owner, or TOO, is not a pleasant place to be. And of course, when do we see this? We see this when we have a lot of component-centric work, when teams are not restructured to become feature-centric teams, when you are really chasing output and numbers as opposed to actual outcomes. And just because you have many teams very swiftly structured in these concentric circles, it doesn't mean it's really scaling. You're really not amplifying any goodness, because delivery by a component team is just a component. Okay, folks, by the way, I just had a message pop up saying free event ends in 10 minutes. So you may want to tweak something.
Sorry to interrupt. Since we are a non-profit organization, as you know, Zoom ends in a time box of 30 minutes or 40 minutes, as far as I remember. So when the connection ends, we're going to reconnect, okay? The password is the same, lowercase letters, agile. We're going to reconnect again, okay? Please don't leave. We're going to continue.
I would be happy if you told me that. I would be happy to share my Zoom, which is unlimited.
But we're going to reconnect.
Well, let's use the 10 minutes wisely then. All right. So, of course, these, this position of an individual that an individual is in, being stuck between a business and technology in the role that is powerless, is not a good place to be. And I do recommend actually playing this video and downloading this comics book from Michael James of Seattle that describes challenges and pitfalls with Scrum adoption when you don't understand the role of a product owner. Okay, this is actually the video that I was referring to. Another instance of bad scaling is when you have legal contracts in place that are not written in a way to support agility. Imagine you have a client company and you got a bunch of vendors that support this client company. So of course, every vendor will have one of their best people, the highest paid people, technical leads, engagement leads involved in this effort. And of course, these people will be managing and providing estimates and on behalf of their own people. Now, if there is a lot of appetite to scale and there is a marching order, let's scale, we oftentimes see this. Like in the cloud, you end up creating a bunch of so-called teams where you staple individuals from different vendors. And of course, these guys, they do mundane, laborious work. They don't have empowerment to set. They're not able to estimate in their own. They're basically order takers. They're not really thinkers. With a lot of appetite to scale, most likely you're going to see this problem. Okay. Lots of reading references and lots of additional ideas you may pick from this slide that is pretty rich in in articles and various in just various references on the subject. So it isn't so much about bashing and scolding other frameworks. It's just collecting some of the evidence from the field, potentially give you insight on what's out there. Hi. Was there a question, Sarkhan? No, sorry, I'm going to be using. So now comes the question: what's the market reality? Why there is such a low tolerance to scaling? Well, because of all of these emissions and all of these, very expensive, very counterintuitive ways to scale work, we end up with a lot. At the moment, I do feel, and when I talk to people that work for large organizations, I do feel that there was a lot of frustration and skepticism about these scaling methodologies or scaling operating models, because they really don't change much. And what COVID has done, it had exacerbated the problem, because now everyone is remote and everyone is very distant from each other. And imagine, as much as there's some goodness with being remote, but being able to reach out to each other quickly, with that also comes challenges, right? Because you don't see what's happening. Imagine you had bureaucracy and problems in the workspace when you are all together in the same building or on the same floor. Now you're all remote. So these expensive frameworks and these expensive ways of working, companies become more sensitive and less tolerant to them now. And that's what I'm hearing from people, at least those that are willing to share candidly their experiences. There was a big reason behind this, by the way, and this is something that I meant to, I think I should have mentioned this up front. These big bang scaling solutions with commercially successful frameworks, with tooling, with large consultancies supporting all of this, they actually cause the problem. They're a very costly proposition. And I refer to this as a triple taxation, because you have to pay 3 times high dollar for a large consultancy, lots of money for those frameworks, as well as for licenses for those tools. And I think I have coined this term too. I refer to it as a DDT, which is not a good thing, by the way. Don't confuse it with TDD, which is a test-driven development. This is a deck-driven transformation. So you have heavy decks floating around, lots of PowerPoints, lots of box notes, lots of wiki pages. It's probably an indicator that your company isn't taking agility seriously, and it's transforming it into some sort of a local optimized center of excellence of collecting documentation. What I'll do at the moment, I will pause and let you restart your Zoom. So when I talk about alternative, which is the alternative way of doing it, we have the whole 40 minutes at least. So would you like to restart your Zoom now?
All right.
It's a nice place.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Okay.
So what should
stopping the video, and I'm restarting. Okay.
Okay. And what should we do? Just stay here?
No. We have to rejoin.
Okay, got it. I'm leaving. Test. Let me share.
Yeah.
I may need your permission. I don't think I'll be recording for the second part. I'll maybe. How soon are you going to make your recording available? I'll just use that, if that's okay.
Right, all right. I'm going to broadcast it tomorrow, probably. On our
No
channel, Gene, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay, let me share. I should be sharing. Do you see my page alternatives?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, good. So first thing, let's make sure we understand this very basic to me, but not always clear to others concept. Organizational structure is the first order factor that defines system dynamics. Your organizational ecosystem, if you will. Everything else just follows. Behaviors, norms, values, processes, policies. It's not that they are not important. They are pretty important. They're just not the first order factor. The first thing that is important is organizational design. And sometimes we don't see people understanding this well, and they focus on things that are of less degree of importance, like metrics, velocities, OKRs, stuff like this. It's kind of trivial, because if you don't change organizational dynamics, if you don't change org design, reporting structures, bonuses, incentives, HR related subjects don't get addressed, the rest becomes kind of trivial. I mean, you will be changing. It's like, imagine you had a rash on your hand and you started applying a cream and it wouldn't go away. And I wonder why it doesn't go away. Well, because you have allergies, you should stop eating oranges, right? Or maybe drink something, and then your rash is going to go away. By trying to improve peripheral manifestation of the problem, you're not really going to be, changing the root cause of it. Okay. And that's what sometimes we see people just, misunderstanding or not following through. I'm going to plagiarize this actually from Craig Larman, one of the co-creators of Large Scale Scrum. He wrote this a few years back, to be exact, in 2015 on the Scrum Alliance website. I call it a sushi roll. In order for an organization to really achieve some success, you need to address so many different organizational domains, such as legal practices, product management, HR, site strategies, not let alone technology and business. Without actually touching these domains, you would be kind of illusional to expect that you are changing systemically, because it can be changing very superficial. Okay. So what am I getting with this too? I mean, why are we even bothering about this, right? So as I mentioned, this is a good old Scrum, and everyone remembers this diagram. I'm sure you've seen different variations of it. You may potentially think of Scrum as the organizational building block, that is the minimum requirement to scale. So think of it as a brick that you use to build the rest organization. Large scale Scrum is when you have more than 2 teams and less than 8 teams working together side by side on the same product, out of the same product backlog for the same product owner. And it isn't Scrum underneath of many organizational layers of bureaucracy, of processes and tools and different structures. It is Scrum scaled up. So if you think about it this way, it is not Scrum done by multiple teams doing their own thing. It is up to 8 teams, 2 to 8 teams scrumming together on the same product. So if you were to look at this analogy, these 6, 7 jockeys, if they were product owners, they were riding their own horses. This would not be a large scale Scrum. This would be maybe 5, 6, 7 horses riding on their own, having very different strategy, vision, mission, and everything else. Now, this would be more like a large scale Scrum, because you got multiple horses with one jockey, one strategist, one mission, vision, and goals pulling in the same direction. And this is the game changer. So we don't want 5 or 6 horses running their own. We want multiple horses, up to 8 horses to be exact, pulling in the same direction. So in other words, if you look at this from a different perspective, here we got 4 teams, 4 real feature teams that work on features, teams that coordinate and integrate together directly, not through conduits or translation layers. Teams that refine together, plan together, and coordinate directly. Then, of course, with this setup, the chances of delivering something that's tangible and valuable are much higher. Of course, for this, sprints must be parallelized, not staggered. Okay, if you have staggered sprints, you're going to have multiple problems coming out of it. So think of it as, if you imagine a bunch of boats rowing in the same direction, right? So you have maybe different size, but each boat is capable of doing the same work, and they pull it on this building block called a product with multiple users that are able to set priorities. I'm sorry, give clarifications, and only one product owner who sets priorities for the teams. Okay. this is actually important delineation. Prioritization goes only through one person called the product owner. Clarification, as much as possible, we want to delegate to these people. And these guys and ladies, I'm sure, they work side by side, rowing in the same direction. They pull in the same, with the same mission and vision. So that would be a good analogy of large scale Scrum. Large scale Scrum has a history, and unless we understand this, we may actually put it in the same group with all other commercially successful frameworks. This isn't so. In fact, the purpose of large scale Scrum was never to become a commercially successful framework. It all started in 2008. Well, it actually started much earlier than that, but the first book was written in 2008, then in 2010, then in 2016. Imagine how much knowledge and expertise has gone into it. An immense amount of expertise, an immense amount of field experiments by people that were deep in the trenches, practitioners, trainers, and coaches. And therefore, when we say large scale Scrum, we have 600 plus experiments there. We mean an immense body of knowledge, really deep learning that you can get from understanding large scale Scrum. It's only in 2015 when it has become what we know today as a framework. Prior to that, it was just a huge set of guides and experiments. We turned it into a framework. Well, Bas Voddy and Craig Larman are the co-founders, much, much later. Okay, so this is just to justify why large scale Scrum shouldn't be put in the same bucket with other commercially known frameworks. And if you want to read this, I would actually recommend reading starting from book that was written in 2016. It's just easier to read. And just to summarize, since we have about 3 to 9 teams, 3 to 9 people on a single team in Scrum, that's a recommended range. And we have up to 8 teams in large scale Scrum as a recommended number. Then we relatively have no more than 70 plus minus a few people in less product group working together. Again, just remember, one product, one backlog, one product owner. Five relationships in the product owner function, you probably know, right? With teams, with Scrum Master, with management, with customers. The fifth one here that's we're pointing at direct is usually on the mind. In large scale Scrum, we make a very strong emphasis on this relationship. It becomes super important. Customers and users, directly with teams. And of course, we want as much as possible for clarification to flow from users and customers into teams. Whereas prioritization will go through the only single channel of command from the product owner onto teams. We don't ask, we don't allow users and stakeholders to tell teams what to do beyond providing clarifications at team's request. I guess I'm going to pause for now, and maybe I will take some questions because the rest of I have some additional slides that I have as a backup, but perhaps I can use them as a part of answering questions. So maybe I can open up the floor now, Ilkert, and say if people have any questions to ask. Anyone?
So we can have 5 or 10 minutes Q&A session, right? Okay. And let's keep the session within the time box. So we have mostly 13 minutes, okay? Sorusu olan var mı? Any questions?
Any questions, folks? We don't actually need to. Okay, I think Karim has a question.
No. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation.
Well, I would like to turn it into a conversation now. Hopefully we can have like a give and take. We don't have to stay for the whole hour or whatever we have left. If there are no questions, of course, just so you understand, large scale Scrum is, maybe that's something I should say, it becomes clear to you. is a huge body of knowledge. And although it may look very super simple at the surface, hey, large scale Scrum is Scrum, what else to say? System modeling and organizational design that is required to make it a success is immense. When we teach large scale Scrum, we stress a lot what's called system modeling, system design, system dynamics. You need to understand things that are much deeper than superficial. Like for instance, when you read some of SAFe articles, or even what people that call founded say, oh, we don't change organizational design. That's a pretty serious thing. Well, we actually say quite the opposite in large scale Scrum and in Scrum. We actually do challenge organizational design, because if it's not supportive of dynamic work, if it's not supportive of agility, we need to raise it. So there's a fundamental difference right there.
Jim,
So we spent.
What was I want to ask you was compared to other scaled agile frameworks like SAFe, Scrum of Scrums, Nexus, whatever. Why anyone or any organization should choose that framework? This was my question, and you started answering it. So, could you please?
Sure.
Would like to answer this question.
So, see, with something like SAFe, I wouldn't even put it in the same bucket. Let me explain in a second why. In fact, there was a huge array. If you go to, actually on my site, I have this stored there. Down below on this page, and this is just a summary people can read at the at the bottom. SAFe has nothing to do with agility. In my view, it's grossly misused and misunderstood. It's a great, it's a very successful way to give a degree of comfort and false sense of security to organizations that are really not looking for systemic change. So on the stable organizational conditions, like maybe not like today we have, maybe if an organization just wants to create an illusion of becoming more agile, like relabeling roles from old to new, relabeling processes from old to new by adding the word agile to it, maybe it's the way to go. It's rough. People that have created SAFe, they don't have any proven track record in the, in the agile world, as like for instance, as Agile Manifesto co-creators or co-signers or Scrum co-creators. These are different people that are behind this. So SAFe is really, it doesn't really challenge your organizational complexity. It doesn't challenge your organizational design. It kind of legalizes, systemizes what you already have out there by adding the word, agile to it. So if your organization just looks for superficial indicators or for superficial improvements, maybe SAFe is the right thing to do. Nexus actually is very close in conceptually and mindset wise to scale to less. Maybe not as well known because it was somewhere later introduced, doesn't have as long of a history of research and investigation and experiments. I think it has been, it has a certainly, I have respect for Nexus ideas and obviously the co-creator with Ken Schwaber. So I won't say much about the network, whether I know or I don't. Scrum at scale, I think that's what you mentioned. Well, I'll tell you the biggest issue that I have with it, and everything else. So some of it is, there's some great ideas there as well, but the biggest challenge what I see there and why it doesn't work for me, this relationship of one-to-one product owner per team, and Scrum of Scrums, and Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrums, and Scrum of Scrum. It looks great on paper. In real life, it is very costly, very ineffective. Calls for very excessive mandatory coordination, and that TOO problem that I was referring to is it. When you got every team having their own so-called product owner, you end up with team output owners and lots of local optimization and very little strategy. So of course, most likely these teams are component teams, not feature teams. So those are my challenges. As far as Spotify, although you didn't ask, it's not even a framework. It's just a set of experiments that small company ran more than a decade ago, has gone out of hands. I think it's, if you read some of the shared articles below, in fact, there's some on Spotify as well. You understand why. There's some great recordings I have on the site as well about Spotify and Safe, coming from people that are also very well known in the industry, and they have done some research, and so they have some content to share. So large scale Scrum effectively is just Scrum, very delicately, very eloquently. You know, when you use it as a building block, yeah, if you feel that Scrum is a good thing, then large scale Scrum is effectively a good thing at scale. But you have to remove stuff. Organization has to be it has to be descaled and make it flatter and made flatter in order for you to scale goodness. Okay, so you scale Scrum and agility by means of descaling an organization.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. And I'm looking at the chat box. Aysun asks, what is the difficult part in SAFe collaboration with other teams?
I'm sorry, what's the difficult part?
In SAFe or less? Aysun.
What's the more difficult part?
In less, I guess, huh? She mentioned less, I guess. What is the difficult part in less and collaboration with other teams?
What's the difficult part in less as far as collaboration of teams?
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, the difficult part of less, I hope I understand the question correctly, is in order for it to be even considered, you need to have a short catwalk and ability to influence and have lots of educational moments with senior management, because large scale Scrum requires organizational redesign. SAFe doesn't. In fact, if you go all the way up here, also I recommend playing this.
Like Kanban, right?
I'm sorry?
SAFe, like Kanban. No
I
need
wasn't
for
referring
the organization.
I wasn't referring to Kanban. I was referring to this link right here from Dean Leffingwell, who is the co-founder of SAFe. He actually goes on record and says, we don't change org structure. Okay, so that makes it extremely easy to unpack and install.
Come as you are. Come as you are. Right? The philosophy of come as you are.
Come as you are. So we take you, we meet you where you are, which is not a bad coaching stance. I'm going to meet you on your grounds. But when it becomes a framework that it claims hundreds of thousands of adapters and companies and individuals, I mean, you essentially, the question was, why is it good, or what, compare and contrast? Well, if you want to put like a wobbly, you want to put a collar on your wobbly neck, or someone wants to put a very baggy clothes to mask, to kind of hide the fact that maybe they are overweight. Maybe that's SAFe. That's what SAFe is.
Okay.
It's not a lean way. It's not something that will expose dysfunction. It's not something that will. It's not something that will force you to change deeply systemically.
Okay. So I'm reading the next one. Where do you stand on Kanban's principle of start with what you do now?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Where do you stand on Kanban's principle of start with what you do now?
Where do I stand with Kanban?
Principle of start with what you do now.
Maybe I missed the second part. As far as Kanban, I have a lot of appreciation and respect for Kanban knowledge. I learned Kanban from some authentic sources, I think, and I read some great books. I recommend you doing the same. Even at single team Scrum level, I have a lot of appreciation with some of the Kanban elements, like for instance, single piece workflow, one task, no task switching, queue management, queue in theory, all that stuff comes from Kanban. You can use it within a sprint to manage your queues, to make sure teams don't multitask, the individuals don't multitask. So it's really not one versus another. I mean, Kanban usually does not require a product-centric work with a product owner being there, constantly setting priorities. A Kanban is oftentimes used for production support and for for other ways of working where you don't need you don't expect and maybe don't need intimate involvement of business people.
I guess Satish is asking where does less stand on the principle of regarding the principle of start with what you do know. He means he's talking about less, I guess, in his question. Where does less stand on principle of start with what you do now, I guess. So
Start
maybe with what you do now, but concerning less.
Could you type it in the window? I'm having a hard time understanding the phrase.
Okay.
You can type it in everyone to everyone.
All right. Sorry, this comes to me, I guess. So I'm repeating it.
Where do you stand on Kanban principles? Start with what you do now.
Regarding less, I guess.
Yeah. So let me try if I understand this. Start with what you do now. During less adoption, we have at least a couple of months of prep work where we prepare the whole organization for a change, for a flip. This requires educating everyone. It requires defining your product, because less is Scrum, and Scrum has been designed as a framework to deliver products, not projects, right? So we define a product. We create an organization team blueprint of what the team would look like to deliver this product. And obviously we need more teams than just one, 2 to 8 teams. So we do lots of prep work prior to flipping the switch and making teams to start sprinting as a less product group. But while we're doing this preparation, obviously teams and individuals might be working in the old-fashioned way. So maybe this is not exactly what you're asking. Start with what you do now. I mean, people are still doing what they're doing, but they're educating themselves and preparing themselves for the flip. And when we feel everyone is ready, then we flip the switch, and up to 8 teams start sprinting on the same cadence.
Well, let's continue. Short answers. We have reached our time box, but
I think we are at the end of the hour, right?
Yeah. So let it be our last question, okay?
I can read the ones, and I do think that agile culture should be top to bottom about. So let me actually take this head on. This is an interesting one. Let me use. I'm going to use my mirror board. 1 second. I'm still sharing, right? Yeah. So let me open up one of my slides. It's an interesting question. I think I can answer it with a graphic. This is just right from the training session. When it comes to where do you start, the three adoption principles of less is deep and narrow versus broad and shallow. So we go deep down, but we don't try to blow the whole organization out of the sky. We take, up to 8 teams, that's roughly 60, 70 people plus some business people. So the deep and narrow. Bottom up and top down. We spend a lot of time and effort and energy to educate people that senior management that are in charge of making decisions, and junior people, and I'm sorry, not junior people that actually deliver value and work, team members. So bottom up and top down, not either or. And of course, by volunteering. We cannot force this into people. We cannot force people into less or less upon people. In fact, this is another graphic. This is actually on a less work side. This is your typical safe-like adoption, very broad, very shallow, and it's focused on stuff that is probably trivial, right? Usually we have these bubbles, right? Oh, I hit something hard, I'm gonna stop digging. This is enough for my next promotion. With less, you go deep and narrow, but much narrower, right? And you touch all of these organizational aspects that are, pretty serious, right? Top down, organizational structure, HR policies, sites and strategies, vendor management. You don't trivialize it. You don't say, well, this is too important for us to touch. We actually do touch it. Okay.
Okay.
Or we end up with the situation where if you don't change it, it's like a physician. You don't listen. You don't want to listen to your professional athletic trainer who tells me, Gene, you have to, go on the Stairmaster and run. And he tells me for the last 5 years. And there was once upon a time the doctor tells me, Gene, you have to do it, otherwise something will happen. So that's my analogy with some of these organizations. They are advised to change the way they work, but if they don't, sooner or later they may have some critical moment when they must change. And then instead of methodically flattening structures and becoming simpler and leaner, they end up letting go lots of good people, which is still, it's like, liposuction enforced in the organization.
I know we are over time.
Yep.
But can we have one last question from,
Please.
and then we
Yeah.
end up with it, okay?
I throw it. Yeah, go ahead.
Should all teams working on the same product run Scrum, or may use different agile practices? For example, there is one product owner, and there are 3 feature teams running Scrum, first level, second level, and third level support teams running only iterations with Kanban. Can they still use less?
I probably need to unpack this question a little bit, but I'll say this. If you have a clearly defined product and you are doing product development and you have a customer in the face of a product owner who is clearly able to set priorities, then, I'm not going to say you shouldn't maybe have additional layering. Well, I really shouldn't be making any determination based on what I see, because may not be sufficient. But let's put it this way: if you think you can use Scrum because there's value in using Scrum, even over Kanban, but your product is too big and one team is not enough, then by definition of less, you can and should be using less, because less is Scrum. So now it's the question not of whether it's Kanban versus less. Just do a simple comparison: Scrum versus Kanban. Is Scrum a more meaningful way for you to work at the moment than Kanban? If the answer is yes, then less would be in the case if your product is too big and your backlog is too deep. Okay.
All right.
I picked my content there, so if you want to take it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one more question, if I can ask.
Sure.
I just wondering, maybe this is something actually, especially just the last implementation. So if the organization implemented the scale agile framework and safe implementation, and then actually rather than actually they are changing to the less framework, and what is the method that actually they are changing direction from the one large scale framework to another? So what do you think about it?
Like changing from one framework to another?
Yeah, it's still actually just the large scale framework, but somehow actually they realize that there is a maybe the really challenging implementation for the safe framework. Then they change the direction to the less framework. Why just this is actually happening back and forth? Actually, still actually they are actually the large scale framework, and why it is happening?
So again, without really understanding much more about the underlying dynamics, my suspicion is that the why this is happening. Less has zero marketing and promotion and sales. It's only heard by the word of mouth. You hear it from me, you hear it from me. You read the book, you understand. You read the site, you understand. All other frameworks, that's why I call them commercial frameworks. They have a very huge marketing machine. And the reason why companies fall for it is because less educated people that make decisions get impacted by these sales pitches and sales calls.
Sure.
That's my take. Most of the time, people that decide on these frameworks are least educated people. but they have this organizational position where they get to make decisions. And of course, because of that, that's why we are so keen on educating senior management, because without their systemic support, we may end up with very grossly wrong decisions by first and second line management, and it just takes everything down the drain. So
thank you. Sorry about that. I have one more question. So if you want to say actually 3 common challenges for implementation less framework in a large scale project, what do you want to say?
It's not for everyone. I mean, in order for you to want to do this, you really need to have an urgent, you need to see the value in Scrum and iterative adaptive work. Challenge, I mean, in my experience, challenges have been mostly with first and second line management that are very protective of their turf and they don't let go, because in large scale Scrum, we don't have managers. It's self-managed, and we have senior manager, but we don't have the typical PMO, PMI style managers, first level leads. Another challenge would be HR norms and policies, because
Sure.
when we expect people to work in a cross-functional way as T-shaped or full stack developers, we should be putting out requests, and we for the same, not for single function specialists. I also feel that when you have bonuses and incentives linked to individual performance, it's very hard to support any kind of team level work. I guess those two most important ones. I mean, to add the third one, and it may sound like a cliche, you need to educate senior management from the beginning. And if you go to literally, if we go to less.works, and this is a huge site, a huge body of knowledge. And when we talk about, I think it's about adoption, you get not structure, there's something that we strongly say, adoption, maybe getting started, right? Educate everyone, define your product, define the definition. It's simplified. I mean, of course, if you ask me, I have a whole array of things that I would usually do with organizations and teams to advocate it. And of course, I cover much more in training, but it's not even enough, still not enough, in order to be engaged with a company for a few months at least. That's what's required to do the needed.
Thank you so
Right.
much.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gene.
My pleasure. Feel free. I mean, you can ask for access to my Slack channel. I'll grant requests. You can always ask questions.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Thank you, Gene.
I would like to thank Gene for being with us tonight, supporting Agile Society Turkey community and his followers. It was awesome meeting you again, Gene. Thank you again. Please do not forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Eventbrite, and YouTube. Take care, everyone. See you on with our next event. Bye-bye. Gene, thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep.